All right, here we are back again. We are going to talk about career assessment this time. And if you just came from the aptitude assessment video, we might have to do a little switching back and forth between those PowerPoints because I had originally split these up for the sake of timing and sort of thematically I split them up. But we might choose to go back there just a little bit. And I am going to close the PowerPoint and show you some PDFs, which means the captions are not going to be available for the entire show here. So I'm going to show you some PDF of test results just to kind of explain a little bit more about how this stuff works. This is a chapter where I can get pretty excited because as a rehab counselor myself, I've done a fair amount of career assessment, and it's usually one of those things that the majority of people in counseling programs are like, I want to learn about diagnostic assessment and clinical assessment, that kind of stuff. Maybe intelligence and personality are okay in there too, but typically career is one of those things that's kind of an afterthought. And I'm going to make the argument today that it shouldn't be an afterthought, that it's a legitimate part of the career counseling process, and that even though I don't think we use career assessment to its fullest potential, I think there's lots of room to do so. The challenge is how do you get somebody to pay for it, which is a whole different can of worms that I'm not going to go into today. But I get really excited about this stuff. I'm also going to be somewhat brief and not quite as thorough because I'm going to talk a lot more about the theoretical foundations of vocational assessment and career theory in different classes too. So I'll give you enough to be competent, I guess, and maybe enough to be dangerous here today and to be able to sort of like look at the assessments and evaluate them and that kind of stuff. But we'll talk more about more parts of this in detail later. So even though I get excited, I'm going to temper my excitement a little bit because I know you'll get more of it later. All right, let's jump into it though. First of all, I mentioned before, I think in the last lecture, if you've already watched that one, that this chapter in this textbook is more focused on human resource assessment and evaluation. What we focus on in rehab counseling oftentimes is disability-related testing. So I don't know if I've showed you guys this before, but if you think of a Venn diagram, 2 overlapping circles, now add a third one, you have 3 overlapping circles. That kind of sums up how I understand what rehabilitation counseling is. In one circle, you have mental health counseling. We understand people's psychological experience of life. On the other hand, another circle, you have disability, the medical factors and the functional, the way our body works, and sort of our functional limitations that we have. And then on top, the third circle is our career or how we work. So vocational rehabilitation counseling, it's all some mix and match of focusing on career, disability, and our mental health or psychological experience or something like that. So some rehab counselors focus a little more on the mental health stuff. They get a license and do therapy, but maybe focusing specifically with disability populations. It's sort of an overlapping of those two. Some people do vocational rehab, which they say disability and career, but it's just a whole lot less of the counseling parts of it. There's lots of ways you can fit in with a degree in rehab counseling, lots of ways you can fit. What we're talking about here is we're talking about if I wanted to focus specifically on career, not so much disability, and I'm working for an agency or a company, and that company needs to figure out how to move employees from, as they apply into specific positions, or whether they even meet the criteria to work for this job. That's kind of what this chapter is about. So if you've ever heard of industrial organizational psychology, that's kind of like this stuff to a T. I also mentioned in the last lecture too that career assessment typically has 3 parts. We test interest. Do you like to do the things? What things do you like to do? The second part is abilities. Even if you like to do them, can you do them? Can you perform the tasks that you like to do? And whenever I say that, I think about like those America's Got Talent or American Idol auditions where somebody comes in and says, I love singing. Oh, my singing is my life. I want to make it my life, whatever. And then they're just like not very good. This is kind of the help with that process. Only it's like saying, I want to become a counselor because I love helping people and I love talking to people about their problems. Everybody hates it when I do it, though, because I just keep telling them what I think they should do with their life, and they don't really want to talk to me about it, but it's so much fun. So probably not the best counselor situation, right? So anyway, the last one, interest, abilities. The last one is values. What are your values? What's important to you? That also is an important ingredient in where you work. And so I'll talk more about that in detail later. Most of the career assessments that we have today are based on a thing called Holland's career theory. And Holland's career theory, I'm going to go through it more in a bit, but basically it's the job requires this. You are this kind of person, so you're probably going to want to gravitate towards something, a career cluster that's going to fit you. It's kind of a matchmaking system. Again, a little bit more later, other classes, you'll get a lot more detail about that. And then one of the things I'll just say is I have a pet peeve about career counseling. One of the things that happens to most of us is we go to high school. I think I shared in the last lecture that I had been given this ASVAB. Some recruiter came in and gave the entire school this test, and they said, I don't remember what my job was that I was likely the best fit for. Who knows what it was? But even in the test that we're going to go over today, someone comes into your high school, they say, okay, take this test, and it says, okay, you should be mine always turn out to be like either a bartender or a sociologist. Because I like talking to people and I like, I don't know, like being helpful, I guess. And so you get these results, and then someone says, okay, now go search the internet for whether it's appropriate, or go to a bar and figure out if you want to do that or not. I don't know exactly how, but like you just kind of are given the results, and then you're on your own to figure out, what do I do with these? What do they mean? It's not the counseling process. The counseling process involves, yes, giving the test, but then also working through, what do these mean? What are your options? How do you go about finding if this is reasonable for you? How do you get to that next stage? There's a whole bunch more that goes on in the counseling process, in addition to sort of just self-study. Go figure it out on your own. So I'll talk more about that later, some other time, but I just wanted to say that when we talk about in other parts of the class, we talk about discussing the results and communicating what they mean. And also, by the way, all those results are used for developing a treatment plan. If you find something going on that's not the way things are supposed to be, it's also nice to know, okay, what can I do about that? You wouldn't just say, oh, you have depression. Good luck. Well, that's the results of your test, so go search the internet. No, you're going to say, let's talk about what that means and how we can work with it. And career counseling just kind of gets dropped, I think, oftentimes. So maybe that's not true. Maybe that's just my opinion, but that's been my experience and what I hear from other people when I talk about this, and then in peers as well. So anyway, let's talk about interest tests using the Holland code. The Holland codes, do I explain these? Yeah, let's skip to this one first. We'll talk about Holland codes, and then we'll talk about the different tests that use it. So this is super tiny. I know you probably can't read this, especially if you're on a small screen. You can, when you look at the slides, you can blow them up. You can also just go to the internet. I think I stole this hexagon picture from the internet. There's lots of different versions of it, so you can investigate on your own if you need to. But basically the way this works is that you take well, let's start this over. Basically, the way it works is there's six different categories here. See if I can do this and point appropriately. There we go, six of those. Depending on how you score on a given test, it's going to give you a number of 3 of these categories, sometimes 2, but most often 3. It's going to say, are you most likely a person who is a realistic type person? Are you more like a conventional type person? Are you more like an investigative type person? It's going to give you these titles, and it's going to say you are strongest in one category, a little bit less so in another, and a little bit less so in another. And so it's going to give you this sort of like cluster. What that means is that you have a tendency towards these different things. So I'm going to explain these different things, and then it'll hopefully fall into place here. If you're a realistic kind of person, on this picture, it calls them doers. You're a person who likes to maybe work with your hands, typically working outside. You're very practical. What does it say on here? People have mechanical abilities. likes to work with objects. So we're talking about people like construction workers, people who work to manipulate objects, like maybe like an engineer who's building electronics or something like that. It's very hands-on and practical. Another category is, let's take the investigator. We'll just go around this way. We'll talk about the investigative people. Think of somebody like, I guess, an investigator, somebody who finds a crime scene and has to solve a puzzle to figure out who did the thing, or a computer programmer who's using their mind to put together a bunch of information and make something happen or make something work, like solve a problem. Scientists are like this. I'm going to read the screen here for a sec. You observe, learn, investigate, analyze, research, evaluate, solve problems. So using math, analytical, anything where you're sort of analyzing information, that's an investigative type person. I already mentioned a computer programmer, but another investigative type job is a little bit like counseling. A lot of people have a relatively strong investigative part of them, because it's like, okay, a person comes in, sits across from you, and you get to say, you tell me the details of your life, I'll take in all that information, and we'll figure out what can we do about this? How do we develop a treatment plan? So that's just something to be aware of. If you get an I code, you are probably that kind of person that likes to think through those things. So anyway, artistic. I'll get out of the way a little bit for this one. Artistic is kind of just like it sounds, like have artistic and creative abilities, but it means a little bit more than just being able to put paint on a canvas or play a musical instrument here. It's also the ability to think outside of the box. If you're the person who you sit in a classroom and the teacher asks a question and everybody's like, oh, the answer is this, and you're like, oh, I never would have got that. I was thinking it was something completely different. Good thing I kept my mouth shut. Well, actually, in this case, the artistic people are the ones that can think differently about things and sometimes solve problems in unique ways, can approach scenarios in different ways. So having that artistic ability can be a real strong value to groups, even though sometimes you can be like, wow, I feel like I'm the outcast or something. Counselors also have a strong artistic tendency, because oftentimes we have to say, given all the information that you have in front of you, we have to creatively find solutions that work within this system, within your family system, with your values and your beliefs. We have to figure out a way to sort of recover from whatever you're recovering from, or heal from it, or whatever that might be. So oftentimes counselors have a strong artistic tendency too. Social. Social is basically just what you think it is. It's about people skills, about working, communicating a lot with other people. Teachers, customer service representatives, and counselors often score highest in social too, because obviously it's a people thing. Nurses, doctors, that kind of stuff too. Enterprising, think of these as like your salespeople. It's not just, yes, it's the ability to communicate too, but it's also the ability to like influence and persuade and perform. I'm now reading off the screen here a little bit. Persuade and perform. Oftentimes it's for economic gain. So, but it's like the entrepreneurial spirit. If you have that or know people that have that, it's like they're goal oriented, and they want to start a new project or new things, and they often get really excited about that, whether it's with people or not. But enterprising is kind of like business, economics, sales, that kind of stuff. And then lastly, conventional. Conventional is very different. Conventional, the stereotypic conventional person that always comes to my mind is like the accountant. They like information and lots of data, just like the investigative people, but it's not really the puzzle so much. Is like it just has to be organized. So you have to it's like the person who loves to work in spreadsheets. So the way they write it here on the screen is clerical or numeric ability, like structure, carrying out things in detail, following through with instructions. My wife is kind of like this. Just everything has to be a process, and if you deviate from the process, she's just like, no, follow the rules. And I'm like, but I'm artistic. I like to try new things and think outside the box. She's like, no, if you just follow the rules, that'd be fine. So So oftentimes these are sort of desk workers, everybody who does your taxes are probably this kind of these kind of folks. So those are the categories. So you'll find lots of different descriptions. Over on this side, there's even more descriptions. This is from a different picture, different website, whatever. And the way this works is that you take a test, people find out what you like to do. Do you like to work on woodworking projects? Do you like to build cabinets? Do you like to receive orders or give them? Do you like to, I don't know, do you like to do puzzles in your spare time? And they're all really easy questions, and they help figure out what kind of category you're in. The way that this often works is that if somebody will go out and assess a whole bunch of other counselors and say, what do you guys like? The people that gravitate towards this kind of work who are successful in it, what are they like? And then when you take the test, they can say, oh, you match the same way that a therapist does. So maybe you should go look into that career. So that's kind of how this is supposed to work. It's sort of matchmaking with the job and the person. Let's go back now and look at some of these other ones. With the understanding that if you're ever taking a career interest inventory, 95% of them are based on that same theoretical model. So you'll always get that 3-letter code that says this is your Holland code. And if you know that stuff, you'll know how to use most of these tests. The standard self-directed search, here's a bunch of details about it. There's different versions of it. I actually don't know a ton about this, but there are people within the program who have used this a whole bunch. Typically for high school or college students entering or returning to the workforce. It's really flexible though. I mean, it can be used from ages 15 to 70 based on Holland's theory. It's not really intended to be used for people who have been in their careers for a long time and have an understanding of who they are as a worker. So like if somebody's changing careers mid-career because of an injury, or are sort of have gone to school to grad school, it's not going to give that level of nuance at the higher levels of education. So just something to keep in mind if you ever have to use it. The strong interest inventory does, though, have a little bit more sensitivity to those higher education levels. So like the rest of them, uses Holland code. It's very widely respected. I'm just going to show you an example of it in a second. But it can provide opportunities for jobs at the higher education levels in a way that the self-directed search doesn't really as much. Campbell's interest and skills inventory, part of that last line is cut off on your screen probably, but it doesn't say anything below that line there, and it says just uses the Holland code like everything else is too. Campbell's interest and skills inventory, I don't know much about this one, but in the textbook it said it requires post-secondary education and is most appropriate for college-bound or college-educated people. So as you can see, some of these are good for people at lower education levels, some for higher, just depends. Okay, I think I'm going to show you the strong interest inventory here. So if you're relying on the captions, this is where I cut out. Let me pull this one up here. Okay, this is what it looks like, and I just want to give you a flavor of this. So it's very colorful. It's very easy to look at. There's a bunch of information here. I'm going to skip over most of this because the way this works is that you take the assessment and then this thing is like mailed to you or emailed or something. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, just like how are you going to benefit from this? How are your results organized? So orienting somebody to their own results. And this is, again, I think they must know that there are not a lot of counselors out there walking people through this. So they have to put the instructions on the paper so people know how to do anything with this information. So that's what this is all about. What does this say? Note to professional. If you're looking through this, check the summary in section 6, blah, blah, blah. So the general occupational themes, here again, it's just describing the same things I just described to you. Social, artistic, enterprise, and conventional. Those are all the Holland codes. Here's a lot more detail about the values that are associated with them, that kind of stuff. Remember when I said, let's look at realistic here. People are working with machines, computer networks, athletics, that kind of stuff, working with your hands, real practical stuff. People who are that way tend to rely on being very traditional. They like traditional values, very practical, I already said that. And then just like being able to do things that are common sense. If you're an athlete, you think, oh, isn't it just common sense that if your body doesn't move this way, move it another way? And you get some nerdy, like, investigative person like me, and you're like, well, theoretically speaking, blah, 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 and as I push up my glasses. So people with common sense don't flock to academia. We'll just say that. I'm going to get in trouble saying that. But anyway, you get the idea. So there's just more detail there. Here are this person's scores. I don't even know who took this one. I think this is like the sample one maybe I found on the internet or something. But here's your theme code. I mentioned that a person usually gets a 3-letter code. This person only got 2. They're highly social. So they scored really high in social, and they scored pretty high in artistic. They probably didn't get a third letter because it shows little interest in that thing. So there's no point in putting a third category here if you're really not that enterprising anyway. So what we do now is we take those 2 things and we look down through here and we start to analyze. Okay, somebody who's high in social has interest in religion and spirituality issues. Think of like a pastor, something like that. Counseling and helping, right? That makes sense. Teaching and education, human resources and training, social sciences, healthcare services. I also mentioned customer service, but again, this is not a test that's particularly useful for people at the lower end of the educational spectrum. But you can find out the information still other places too. And then artistic, writing and mass communications, culinary arts, performing arts, visual arts. Now, the challenge for the counselor too is also, okay, now how do we mash those 2 together? Which we'll find out in a little bit. But is there a way to blend my interest in culinary arts with teaching and education? Well, maybe. Maybe there's a home ec teacher. Maybe you just got a new job with HelloFresh or one of those online food ordering services, and they need somebody to help explain to people how to cook their stuff or something like that, you know? I don't know. This is an example. But so a lot more information here to play with. I don't want to spend too much time on this. But then it gives you specific top 10 strong occupations. Speech pathologist, librarian, mental health counselor, special education teacher, etc., etc. There are also occupations of dissimilar interest, things that are probably like way on the other side of things you would actually care about. But it's the reason I think some of these are put here is because it's common for us to be like, well, everybody else says I should be a doctor, so I should probably go take some classes for, I don't know, in medicine or something. Biology and chemistry classes. I did that when I was in school, and I was like, this is not for me, not something I want to do. I did fine in them, but I didn't like them. So I found that out pretty quickly. See, is there anything else in here? There's usually a ton more information. See here, the speech pathologists tend to score with an SA code. Mental health counselors score just primarily strong with a social code. Here's just a bunch more stuff to sift through, lots of different occupational titles to explore. See, I don't want to scan through this whole thing. There was one other thing I want to talk about. Here it's going through a little bit about values too, personal styles. If you have a strong social score, you likely prefer working with people, and then it gives a little bit more information about values here. What was the other thing that I wanted to... It doesn't show it in here. There's another place where you can, it's not in here, I think it's in a different system, but using your Holland code, you can use this thing where it'll say, if my code is this, show me all the occupations, then you can split them up between level of education, that kind of stuff. So, okay, that's enough for that one. The other thing I wanted to show you, and I'm going to switch back here to, I mentioned I might do this. So I'm going to switch back to the last, there we go, the last presentation. Remember when I mentioned the CAPS system, and there is a scale for interests, abilities, and values? Now I want to show you the CAPS system, and we're going to come back to the subscales of mechanical reasoning, spatial relations, etc. Some of you might get super bored with this and you just don't care because you're going to be a therapist and you're never going to do career counseling with people, whatever. That's totally fine. You don't need to go there. But for those of you that are doing rehab counseling, this is like your bread and butter. So that's kind of why I'm going through this in more detail. So let me pull this up. So here we have it's called the CAPS system. Here it's called the COPS system. But this is the COPS interest portion of it. That's why it's like that. So very much like the Holland system that we just showed, this one's slightly different. It just gives you these different categories of like specific industry kind of categories, I guess. This person who scored, this is one that I gave this to somebody, and they scored pretty high on a couple different categories. And we're gonna, as we go through here, we're gonna try and together sort of narrow down what do we think might be an appropriate career path for this person. So I think when we look at these results, it's pretty obvious which ones stand out, right? This person has some interest in science and they have some skills in it, consumer economics, and being outdoors. Now let's just think about science. There's lots of stuff. Well, let's combine science and consumer economics. When you think about science and consumer economics, what kind of jobs come to mind? I think maybe like gadgets, like putting together electronics or phones or whatever. This doesn't mean just like creating them and developing them. It could mean selling them as well. We don't really know whether she's a sales kind of person or whatever, but she's interested in science-like stuff and consumer economics, so how people buy things, how people sell things. So I'm also thinking about like selling scientific equipment or selling technical gadgets or something like that. Then there's this outdoor piece. The outdoor piece I'm not sure what to do with, but this person wants to work with people outdoors. So what if a person were to be like a salesperson driving around the country or driving around the state or something, and they were selling high-end medical equipment, something like that. Or they were selling, I don't know, lumber, various different kinds of trees, and they knew details about what lumber was good and how it worked. And there's lots of different kinds of work, but that's sort of, in my mind, I'm putting together these categories. Okay, now we come down to this portion of the CAPS system, and now we're talking more about abilities. We're not talking about just what do you like, we're talking about what are you capable of. And the way to look at this is that you have all these shaded regions up here, and the shaded regions, don't worry too much about what the shaded regions mean. What we're really looking at is these yellow dots are the indicators of this person's score. And what you want to know is you want to know how far away from the shaded region this person's score is. So the further over this, which way are we? This way on the scale. The further over this way, the more likely they are going to be successful in this area. Now, this is a little bit exceptional because this is a person who was a pretty accomplished college student, the daughter of a friend of mine, pretty accomplished college student. And so she had lots of skills and capabilities. It's not really that common to see the yellow marks this far over on the scale. What you can see is they may be overlapping the shaded regions. The farther over here, well, my hand cut off, but the farther over that way towards the darker green regions of this this graph, the more likely a person would need further training in order to get good at that. So let's say they were really they really liked science, this category of science skilled work. Up there in the last one it said, oh, she's really interested, or maybe let's do the outdoor one. They're really interested in outdoor work, but they scored low on the ability to perform in that outdoor work. So they need to do some like maybe training to get better at those that kind of stuff. However, this person seems to be pretty good at all of this. One thing of note is I look at categories like technology skilled. Now she's skilled in science, but technology, maybe not as much. Now she's the way these results are, she's totally fine. But look at this one down here. As far as communication goes, she's got some really strong communication skills. So when I'm thinking about like what kind of work she could do, her ability to talk and communicate and potentially teach or sell, that one's going to be pretty strong. And you know, all these are really strong too, but that one specifically. So I'm keeping that in mind. And by the way, if I'm talking to somebody about this, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to say what I just told you guys. It seems like you're really good at this. What do you think? And sometimes people are like, oh, not really. I don't know, maybe kind of, sort of. And they have like low self-confidence, or they don't believe self-concept or self-efficacy or something like that. They may not believe they have that skill, or they may be nervous about it, but they do have a strong skill. And so part of it is like, how do you liven up or bring out those traits in a person and give them the feedback to say, well, if this is something you choose to do, you're probably going to be pretty good at it. And that's the counseling process, not just giving them a result and saying, what career do you want to do? But also saying, what do you think you're going to be good at? And how can I use this process to build that into your future path? Something like that. Okay. And then there's this section. This section, when we think about these numbers on the side, 0 through 100, what we're talking about in this 0 through 100 is basically T-scores. So 50 being average. If somebody performs at average, that means that they're basically in the middle of our normal curve. In fact, it says it right up here in our instructions. Oh, it's hard to see that, I guess, but it says right at the top of the screen there, it says, if you scored 50, that means 50 people score above you and 50 people score below you, or 50% of others score above or below you. However, this girl, she scored in the category of PSA, which means, I always forget what these different ones are. I will tell you, hang with me, I'm almost there. Perceptual speed and accuracy. So in perceptual speed and accuracy, she scored a whole lot better than most of the other people. Same thing with VR, which is verbal reasoning. So remember that the communication thing we saw above? It kind of makes sense that she'd score high in communication if she's good at using words, verbal reasoning, and perceptual speed and accuracy. She can see things and move really quickly. That doesn't have anything to do with communication per se, but just to explain like how these categories work. Over here on the right-hand side, or left-hand side, sorry, 0 through 9, those are basically your stay 9 scores, or standard 9 scores. We talked about those several months ago. They mean basically the same thing as our T-scores over here, but this is another example of seeing stay 9 scores and T-scores in the same graph showing the same information. Okay, anything else? Oh yeah, here is work values. So the way these work values are set up is they're kind of on a spectrum, a little bit like when we talked about the Myers-Briggs type indicators. On the Myers-Briggs, you have these 4 different spectrums, essentially. One of them being like introvert, extrovert. Here we have reserved and social. I think about those basically the same way. If you're a reserved kind of person, you probably want to work by yourself mostly. Maybe not work around other people or have to talk to people a lot, which is a little strange because here's a girl who she scored really high in her verbal reasoning and her ability to communicate, but she likes to work alone. So what does that tell you? Does that mean that she wants to be out on the beaten path selling things to people and talking to them? Probably not. She might see herself as a little bit more wanting to work independently. So maybe working in the written form might be good. She has clear command of language and she can talk about things and write things in words that communicate important stuff, but maybe she doesn't want to work around people, so she can write things down. So maybe writing is more important. Let's look at just one more, just for sake of example. Right in the middle here, we have on the scale of supportive and leadership. Supportive, what that basically means is that she's looking for more, instead of being a leader who is a person who's like, I can make decisions, I want to take control, I can lead a group to do different things. here's a person who wants to be kind of told what to do and follow some instructions and follow directions. So she wants to like be given a process and then just follow through with it, not necessarily to give other people orders. So when you take all this stuff into consideration, she's skilled in science, she's good at communication, she wants to work, or she's interested in working outdoors, she's interested in science as well. She's a pretty reserved person. She wants to kind of take orders from somebody else, not necessarily be the boss, but have a boss. What kind of job comes to mind for you? And you can pause it if you want to think about it, or just yell something out, or probably most of you are like, I just want you to stop talking soon. So just tell me what the answer is. The answer is, I don't really know. But one of the things that has come to mind in the past is, what was it? Oh, I had a really good answer for it at one point. Now I'm forgetting. My sickness is getting to me. I can't remember what it was. But so I'm just gonna to not try to come up with an answer right now, because otherwise it'll just sound like a bonehead, like I said in the last one. One of the other things that can be good about having results like this is that the CAP system and things like the ONET interest profiler, which we haven't talked about yet, it can also give you job information. Like what's the most successful careers right now based on how many available job openings are there. Like it's great if you find out that you can be a rocket scientist, but nobody wants to go to space. So like, is it really practical to make that decision? Maybe not. Although right now people are really interested in going to space, so that's a bad example. But I don't know, becoming a printing press operator. Well, printing presses are not a thing anymore now the internet's around, so that's probably not the best job to go into, right? So you can get updated economical or labor market information to go along with, I'm interested, I'm capable, I have these values, but what's available to me? That's kind of the next step that we're not going to really get into. But hopefully that was a valuable use of your time, that we could go into that stuff. So if not, sorry. I just wasted a few minutes of your life. There are a bunch of other kinds of career assessment. I just explained the CAPS. Donald Super is another name that you'll hear in a different class. I won't go into it too much. But he has a work values inventory. If you've ever heard of the Cooter system, Cooter is like, I've seen it mostly at colleges and universities through like career centers and stuff like that. But it's just another system, kind of like the CAPS, where it has more than just an interest inventory, a little bit of abilities inventory, just a whole bunch of additional information that can help walk you through the process of understanding available careers for you. It's a little, this industry is a little strange to me. And you know how I mentioned the chapter is written for HR and not a lot of counseling happens. A lot of these vocational systems have come to be these like pieces of software that self-direct people through, or I don't know if that makes sense, direct people through in their own sort of like self-paced way, going through the assessment and then getting results and then finding out how to deal with like links to the internet, to where to go and that kind of stuff, as a supplement to the human components of counseling people through that process. And I don't really necessarily think it's a terrible thing, but it's been one of those things of like, you know, we can't, the government has not been able to pay, the government and private industry can't pay people to go out with every high school student and tell them like, take the test, now let's talk about it. There are not enough school counselors to go around, right? We can't afford to pay for more of those just to do this career guidance stuff. So what are our options? Well, one option is to automate the process. And so I have this like love-hate relationship with it. It's a pet peeve of mine, but I also understand it. And I think these tools do a pretty good job of automating that process, even though wouldn't it be nice if we all had a counselor that could sit down with us and talk about our careers? I mean, I'm biased, of course, but here's a couple other ones. I don't need to go into these all in great detail. The one thing I will mention too is this Minnesota Importance Questionnaire. there was a lot of interest in career evaluation and assessment development in general in like the 50s, 60s, 70s through the 80s maybe. That Minnesota Importance Questionnaire was a really cool one, and now it's just not supported because the people who developed it and maintained it don't do it anymore, and they're I don't know if they're alive still or not. I have no idea. But that one you can't find anymore. It just doesn't exist. And pretty much only nerds like me are like, oh, it's so sad. We've lost a piece of history. And you're like, who cares? There's got to be something else, right? Well, nothing else did it quite as good as that one. What that did was it was a values inventory to talk about people's values. Here's one that gets used a little bit, but even this one I don't think is used that much. And I'd love to do a demonstration for you. There is a video demonstration on D2L if you want to watch it. And I'll maybe do one of these in class just for fun. But the card sort test, basically what it is you can go to the ONET website, or O*net, stands for Occupational Network. It's a government website. And if you know how to find it, you can find this PDF document or something, and you download it, and you cut out the pieces. The way it works is you have this piece of paper, and then all these different cards. And on the cards, it has work values. And you sit down with somebody, and you say, okay, here's the value of punctuality. And then you put it in these different categories. How is it important to you? And they say, oh, this one's super important to me. And they put it as like a 5 in this category. And then they say, okay, here's another value of like adequate pay. And they're like, oh, that's really important to me too. And they put it as a 5 in the next category. And they fill up all the 5 categories. And they say, here's another one about flexibility to make your own decisions at work. And they're like, oh, that's super important to me. But then they have to figure out, well, is it more important than the other ones that you put higher? And so they, as you work through these all, they sort of rank the different values that are the most important, and you sort of come out with this idea of which ones are foundational and core to, like, these ones are sort of make or break. The reason this can be useful is if you have somebody who's like, I know what I'm interested in, I know what I'm good at, I've already gone to school, I have this career, but I can't seem to hold down a job because either I leave or I get fired, or just like I keep moving around a lot. And it might be a psychological issue, and there's some other sort of like a relationship, interpersonal stuff going on. Or it might be that I just have a boss that keeps micromanaging me and is hovering me over me all the time. And you go to the boss, and the boss is like, oh, I'm just trying to provide as much support as I can. And so here's a person who values, I need to make independent decisions and be trusted, and a boss who values, I was never given the support and help. And the values are just clashing, right? And so this is where, if a counselor has the time and the energy to go through these things, they can say, here are your values. Here's how you need to advocate for those when you're on the work site. So knowing that you're a person who needs a little bit of independence, you can tell people that and say, I appreciate that you're trying to help me and give me support, but it's really overwhelming me. So if you could give me some space, I can probably function a little better. And you can walk people through how to have those conversations and that kind of stuff. So that's why these can be really fun and helpful. But if we don't show you how to use them, they're kind of useless. So I just wanted to mention that because there's, this is one of those areas where I'm like, I get overexcited about this stuff and you guys may not care, but there are values for them. I just don't know that everybody recognizes that. Okay. We won't talk about this here, but personality inventories are important for career counseling. I think we talked about those slightly in the last unit on personality inventories. So, and so we'll just leave that last comment there. We got to be almost done here. What time we got? Yeah, 43. We got to be almost done. Employee assessment. So what employee assessment refers to is assessing an employee for the right fit on the job. When we talk about assessment in this class, we talk about it being both the tools and the assessment process. Like you're doing an interview with somebody, you're taking all this information in, trying to figure out like what might be the issue, what's going on, learning about them so that you can make good decisions about how do you treat them or what do you do moving forward, what services do you provide. That's the process. You might use some specific tools in that process to find out more information that you just don't have available through the interview, but you may not also. In terms of career matching and career planning and all that kind of stuff, we have a process and we have specific tools that we use. And we've just talked about some of the tools. One of the tools that gets used oftentimes by a lot of people, and they don't even think about it, is like standardized interviews. You ever been to an interview and someone says, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, or some variation of that question? It's because that's sort of like a standardized part of the process of interviewing. The question is, what are we interviewing for? What are we trying to do in the interview process? And this is a whole discussion. I don't want to go too deep into it, but I don't actually think interviews usually work that well, because interviews are usually about, does this person have the skills, right? Like, that's why we have resumes. That's another tool that we use. We send in the resume. It shows all my education, my training, my skills, but also we're looking for things like, are they going to be do they have the right character? Are they going to show up on time? Are they going to be diligent? Are they going to be whatever I need them to be to perform this job? And that's what letters of recommendation are for. And then there's this other stuff of like, do I like them? Can we work together? Can we have good enough rapport to function together as a team? Those kind of things are legally dubious, and how do you hire for them? And there's all this like discrimination stuff that's really important to consider too in the employment process. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about assessment here. Interviews are not very valid. In other words, validity being, do they do what it's supposed to do? Does an interview select candidates that are appropriate for the job? Well, sometimes yes, but people come and go from jobs so often and so much that interviews are apparently not the best way to find out, is this person a good fit? Because if you're just looking for education, or do they have the right credential or the license, we must be missing something. We must be creating an environment where either they're not understanding what this job is going to be like, or I'm not understanding who they are and whether they're going to like it here, something like that. So I don't find interviews to be very valid as far as like the employment process. So the tools that we've described are some attempt to try and get at, well, how do we make better fits, better matches? Now, this is a whole conversation about maybe it's, the workplace culture and, all that kind of stuff. And that's so important. This is a big part of a bigger quagmire of labor market issues, but when just like mental health issues. But the question is, are our assessment tools doing what they're supposed to be doing? And if you ever hire somebody, if you're ever operating as a counselor, one of the things I'd beg you to consider is, are you doing interviews assuming that you have the most perfect sense of reading people and understanding them? I would beg to differ that you probably don't. You'll get good at it if you practice it, but most of us don't have that skill leading out of the gate or out of school or when we're not practicing it or something. Anyway, here's a bunch of other names of career assessments. I'm not going to go into those too much more, just for the sake of time. And I think I'm just going to skip over that last point here just for the sake of time as well. One last thing that I want to mention too in relation to career evaluation, this is really important for rehab counselors, is there's another assessment process called a job analysis. What a job analysis is, you can I'll just read it to you. How about that? I'll do the thing you're not supposed to do when you're lecturing, is read off the slides. Purposeful, systematic process for documenting the particular duties and requirements of a job and the relative importance of these duties. What does that mean? It means you're not doing an assessment of a person, you're doing an assessment of the job. What does this job require? So if I have a job of counselor, it's going to require a person to sit for up to 7 hours a day, we'll say, not including break times and meetings and that kind of stuff. So the job of therapist means sitting in a chair for 7 hours a day. It also means communicating a lot. It means some clerical work. It means a highly trained social skills. So there's a whole bunch of other things that are required to be a therapist. So the reason that's important is it's used a lot in the rehab world, because if a person says, well, I used to do this job and now I can't anymore because I have this physical limitation now that I have an injured shoulder or something. A job analysis allows me to go out and say, well, okay, you want to do this job? Here's what this job would require. you can do this with your injured shoulder, or we can take this job and accommodate this one task a little bit. That's one of the ways a job analysis can be used. There's lots of other ways too, and again, for the sake of time, I don't want to go into it much more, but lots of big companies use this to analyze. We have this big production process, and we need people to do these various unique tasks. So how do we divvy that up so people aren't working over each other or duplicating efforts? Or when we're hiring, we know what we can tell people to expect when they're applying for a job, something like that. You need to be able to lift 10 pounds. You need to be able to do this thing. You need to be able to talk to others, etc. You need to be able to sit for 7 hours a day, something like that. So job analysis is an assessment of the work, not the person. That's the idea. When you're making a matchmaking fit here, we want to know that kind of stuff. A lot of that kind of work has been taken over by HR and consultants to companies and that kind of stuff, unless disability is a factor. And that's where we can come in and do an analysis of a job in a way that HR can't do, because HR and consultants, they often look at the organization, what's their task, what's required of to get the item produced or the service provided or something like that. However, they're not often looking at specifically how do people function in that role in terms of like their physical capabilities. And so a job analysis from a rehab perspective is a lot more detailed analysis about how people move on the job and what skills they use, so that we can then determine whether this is a fit for a person or something like that. So I think I've kind of mentioned most of the purposes of a job analysis and what I just told you. And I have some tools and resources. There are some on D2L, like I have a book for you if you want to look at it. I think I put the PDF up online, or maybe it was just the job analysis worksheet tool. I'm not sure exactly, but that's something we'll want to, if you are doing rehab work, this is something you probably want to check into. Not all kinds of rehab work will do these kind of things. But it is something you'll want to know about for sure if you're going to take the CRC exam. So, okay, that is it. I am done. I'm gonna just cut myself off right now, since we're between the two of these. This is over my hour time limit for the week. So, good luck. Thank you for paying attention, and I will talk to you again in the next one. See ya.